Every night after midnight, the boy appeared. No one knew where he came from. No one knew where he went when the sun came up. Yet for nearly 3 weeks, 72-year-old cemetery caretaker Arthur Bennett kept seeing the same thing. A small figure slipping through the gates of St. Matthew's Cemetery, walking between rows of headstones, and stopping beside the same grave. Then he would lie down on the grass and fall asleep. Arthur first assumed the boy had family buried there, but after several nights, concern replaced curiosity. Winter was approaching. Temperatures dropped below freezing after midnight. No child should have been sleeping outdoors. The strange part was that whenever Arthur approached, the boy ran every time. He refused food. He refused blankets. He refused help. Yet there was one exception. Titan, Arthur's 8-year-old Doberman. The large black dog spent every night patrolling the cemetery beside him. Unlike everyone else, Titan could walk directly up to the boy without frightening him. Sometimes the boy would even wrap his arms around the dog's neck and quietly fall asleep against his side. It was the only time Arthur ever saw him smile. Then, one freezing November morning, Arthur arrived at the grave earlier than usual and discovered something that changed everything. The boy wasn't sleeping beside the grave. He was protecting it, and hidden beneath a loose section of the headstone was a letter written by the boy's mother just days before she died. A letter that revealed why the child had nobody left to trust and why a Doberman had become his last friend in the world. Arthur Bennett had worked as the caretaker of St. Matthew's Cemetery for nearly 20 years. At 72 years old, he moved slower than he once had, but he still completed the same routine every day. He unlocked the gates at sunrise, tended the grounds, repaired damaged markers, and made sure every grave received the respect it deserved. The cemetery sat on the edge of a small town in western Pennsylvania, surrounded by rolling hills and old oak trees. Most people visited only occasionally. Arthur was there every day. His constant companion was Titan, an 8-year-old Doberman with a calm temperament that surprised anyone unfamiliar with the breed. Titan accompanied Arthur everywhere. He rode in the maintenance cart, followed him between headstones, and spent evenings patrolling the cemetery grounds. Residents trusted the dog almost as much as they trusted Arthur. The strange sightings began in late October. One evening, while locking a side gate, Arthur noticed movement near the northern section of the cemetery. At first, he thought it was a deer. Then the figure stepped into the moonlight. Ah, boy, no older than 10. The child wore an oversized jacket, worn sneakers, and a knit cap pulled low over his face. Arthur called out to him immediately. The boy took one look at the old caretaker and ran. Arthur searched the area, but found nothing. The next night, the boy returned. Then, the night after that, eventually Arthur discovered the pattern. The child always arrived shortly after midnight. He always visited the same grave, and he always disappeared before sunrise. Curiosity slowly turned into concern. Winter was approaching quickly. Temperatures dropped lower every week. One particularly cold evening, Arthur left a blanket near the grave before returning to his office. The next morning, the blanket remained untouched. 2 nights later, he left a thermos of hot chocolate. The boy ignored that too. It became obvious that the child wanted nothing from adults. Yet Titan was a different story. The first interaction happened by accident. Arthur was trimming hedges near the cemetery entrance when Titan wandered off. Several minutes later, he found the Doberman lying quietly beside the boy's grave. The child sat against the headstone with one hand resting on Titan's shoulder. Neither appeared frightened, neither moved. They simply sat together in silence. Arthur watched from a distance. The moment the boy noticed him, he jumped up and ran. Titan remained where he was. "Well," Arthur muttered, scratching the dog's head, "looks like he likes you more than me." After that, the pattern changed. The boy still avoided Arthur, but he no longer ran from Titan. Some nights, Arthur watched from afar as the child shared pieces of his sandwich with the Doberman. Other nights, he fell asleep, with one arm wrapped around the dog's neck. Titan seemed to understand that the boy needed comfort more than protection. Then Arthur finally learned the name on the grave. Sarah Mitchell, born 10/8/88, died 2025. Loving mother, beloved daughter, gone too soon. Arthur immediately understood. The boy wasn't randomly choosing a grave. This was his mother's resting place. The discovery only deepened the mystery. If his mother had died recently, where was the rest of his family? Why was he sleeping in a cemetery? Why was he alone? One freezing November morning, Arthur arrived earlier than usual after a snowstorm passed through town overnight. Fresh snow covered the cemetery. Most of the grounds looked untouched. Yet near Sarah Mitchell's grave, he noticed something strange. Footprints. Not one set. Several. Arthur followed them carefully. They circled the grave repeatedly before disappearing into the woods beyond the cemetery fence. Then he noticed the boy, curled against the headstone, fast asleep. Titan lay beside him, shielding him from the cold wind. For the first time, the child looked completely exhausted. Arthur approached cautiously. The boy didn't wake up. That worried him more than anything else. Then Arthur noticed something sticking out from beneath the base of the headstone, a folded piece of paper hidden behind a loose stone. Curious, he carefully pulled it free. The envelope contained only 2 words written in neat handwriting. For Ethan. Arthur's heart skipped. He looked at the sleeping boy. Ethan. Finally, he had a name. Then he opened the letter. The handwriting belonged to Sarah Mitchell, and before Arthur reached the end of the first paragraph, he realized the child sleeping beside the grave was in far more danger than anyone had imagined. Arthur Bennett sat on a nearby bench, while Titan remained beside the sleeping boy. Snow drifted gently across the cemetery as the old caretaker carefully unfolded Sarah Mitchell's letter. At first, he felt guilty reading something clearly intended for someone else. Then he remembered the child asleep against the headstone. If Ethan truly had nowhere to go, the contents of the letter might explain why. Arthur began reading. My dear Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't stay as long as I wanted. The words immediately tightened his chest. Sarah knew she was dying when she wrote it. The letter continued. She apologized for leaving her son alone. She told him how proud she was of the brave, kind boy he had become. She reminded him that none of what was happening was his fault. Arthur had seen similar letters before. Parents facing terminal illnesses often struggled to leave behind the words they wish they could say in person. Then the tone changed. If your Uncle David comes looking for you, do not go with him. Arthur froze. He read the sentence again. Sarah described years of conflict with her brother. According to the letter, David Mitchell had repeatedly tried to gain control of money left behind by Ethan's late father. She accused him of dishonesty, manipulation, and threats. More disturbing was the next paragraph. I filed the paperwork with attorney James Holloway. He knows the truth. If anything happens to me, he has the documents. Trust him. Trust nobody else. Arthur slowly lowered the letter. Snow continued falling around him. Suddenly, the situation made much more sense. If Sarah died recently, and Ethan feared being taken by his uncle, it explained why the boy avoided adults. Then Arthur noticed something written at the bottom of the page. A phone number. Beside it, Sarah had written, "Call only if you need help." Arthur stared at the sleeping child. Ethan looked thin. Too thin. His cheeks were hollow. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. The boy hadn't simply spent a few nights outdoors. He had likely been surviving alone for weeks. Arthur folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket. At that moment, Ethan stirred. His eyes opened suddenly. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then the boy noticed the envelope in Arthur's hand. Fear instantly appeared on his face. He jumped to his feet. No. Arthur raised both hands. Easy. Ethan backed away. Give it back. Titan stood but remained calm. The Doberman moved beside the boy rather than Arthur. Somehow the dog understood exactly who needed reassurance. I'm not taking it, Arthur said softly. I just wanted to know if you were okay. Ethan's eyes filled with panic. Nobody's okay. Arthur felt his heart break a little. Children shouldn't sound like that. They shouldn't carry that much fear. What's your name? Arthur asked. Ethan hesitated. Then his eyes widened. You read it. Arthur nodded. Ethan? The boy looked down. Mom said not to trust people. I know. Ethan stared at him. Then why are you talking to me? Arthur thought about the question. Because your mother also wanted someone to help you? Silence followed. Ethan looked uncertain, conflicted. For the first time, he didn't run. Then something unexpected happened. Titan walked forward and gently nudged Ethan's hand with his nose. The boy immediately relaxed. Arthur noticed it. The dog had become the bridge between them. Titan likes you, Arthur said. Ethan managed a faint smile. He's the only one. The answer was quieter than a whisper. Arthur glanced toward Sarah's grave. Your mother loved you very much. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. I know. Then let's make sure we honor what she wanted. The boy looked away. You don't understand. Then help me understand. For several moments, Ethan said nothing. Finally, He pointed toward the woods beyond the cemetery. "They're looking for me." Arthur frowned. "Who?" "My uncle." The fear in his voice was unmistakable. "And other people?" Arthur immediately became alert. "What other people?" Ethan swallowed hard. "The ones he owes money to." The old caretaker felt a chill, unrelated to the weather. Suddenly, Sarah's warning seemed even more serious. Then Ethan revealed the detail that changed everything. Mom found out something before she died. Arthur remained silent. "Something about Dad's money." Ethan looked toward the grave. "That's why Uncle David is scared." Arthur felt the pieces beginning to move into place. Sarah hadn't simply been worried about a dishonest relative. She had been protecting her son from something larger, something dangerous enough that a 10-year-old boy preferred sleeping in a cemetery rather than being found. Then headlights appeared beyond the cemetery gate. A black pickup truck slowly rolled into the parking lot. Ethan saw it first. The color immediately drained from his face. "He's here." Arthur turned. The truck door opened. A man stepped out, mid-40s, heavy build, dark jacket. Even from a distance, Ethan recognized him. "That's David." The boy's hands began shaking. Titan moved instantly, positioning himself between Ethan and the approaching man. Arthur slowly stood. For the first time in years, he felt less like a cemetery caretaker and more like a guardian standing between danger and a frightened child. And judging by the look in Ethan's eyes, the real trouble was only beginning. The black pickup rolled to a stop beside the cemetery office. Snow crunched beneath heavy boots as the driver stepped out and scanned the grounds. The moment Ethan saw him, he moved closer to Titan. The Doberman immediately sensed the change. His posture stiffened, his ears lifted. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest. Arthur Bennett had known Titan for 8 years. The dog rarely growled at anyone. That alone told him everything he needed to know. "Stay behind me," Arthur said quietly. Ethan nodded. The boy's face had turned pale. His hands trembled so badly, he shoved them into his jacket pockets to hide it. The man approached slowly. "There you are." His voice sounded calm, but something about it felt rehearsed. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Ethan didn't answer. The man stopped several yards away. His eyes shifted briefly toward Arthur. "I'm David Mitchell, Ethan's uncle." Arthur offered no handshake. "Arthur Bennett." David forced a smile. "Thank you for finding him." "I didn't find him." Arthur glanced toward Sarah's grave. He found this place himself. For a brief second, annoyance flashed across David's face. Then the smile returned. "Well, he's been through a lot." He looked toward Ethan. "Come on, buddy. Let's go home." Ethan immediately shook his head. "No." The answer came so quickly that even David seemed surprised. "Ethan, no." Titan stepped closer to the boy. David's smile disappeared completely. "You're a child." His voice hardened. "You don't get to decide." Arthur noticed Ethan take another step backward. The reaction wasn't normal. This wasn't the behavior of a stubborn child refusing rules. This was fear. Genuine fear. "Maybe we should slow down," Arthur said. David looked irritated. "This is a family matter." Arthur folded his arms. "The boy seems pretty uncomfortable." Because he's grieving, David's eyes narrowed slightly. And because strangers keep filling his head with nonsense, Arthur immediately understood the message. Back off. Unfortunately for David, Arthur Bennett had spent 4 years in the Marine Corps before becoming a cemetery caretaker. Intimidation rarely worked on him. "Funny," Arthur said calmly. "He seemed comfortable enough until you arrived." Silence settled between them. Then David's gaze shifted toward the grave, specifically toward the loose stone where Sarah's letter had been hidden. Arthur saw it instantly. So did Ethan. The man wasn't looking at the grave because he missed his sister. He was looking for something. David noticed Arthur watching him and quickly looked away. Too late. The old caretaker had already seen enough. Then Ethan whispered something, barely audible. "He doesn't know where it is." Arthur glanced down. "What?" Ethan swallowed. "The papers." David's head snapped toward the boy. "What papers?" The reaction was immediate. Too immediate. Ethan flinched. Arthur stepped forward. Titan moved with him. David seemed to realize he had made a mistake. "I'm talking about inheritance paperwork," he said quickly. "Legal stuff." Nobody believed him. Not even a little. Then a police cruiser entered the cemetery parking lot. David's expression changed instantly. A uniformed officer stepped out. Officer Maria Lopez. She had known Arthur for years. "Everything okay?" she called. David immediately smiled again. "Just a misunderstanding." Maria looked toward Ethan. "You all right?" The boy didn't answer. Instead, He moved behind Titan. The Doberman remained planted between Ethan and every adult present. Maria noticed. That's not exactly a comforting sign. David sighed dramatically. My nephew has had a difficult few weeks. Ibet. Maria walked closer. Mind if I talk to him? David opened his mouth to object. Ethan spoke first. Can I talk without him here? Silence. Complete silence. Maria looked at David. David looked at Ethan. Arthur watched the entire exchange carefully. Finally, Maria nodded. You can. David's jaw tightened. I'm his legal guardian. Maybe, Maria replied calmly, but right now, he's asking for space. For the first time, genuine anger appeared on David's face. Then he saw Maria's hand resting near her radio and thought better of it. Fine. He pointed toward Ethan. I'll be back. The boy said nothing. David returned to his truck, climbed inside, and drove away without another word. The moment the vehicle disappeared down the road, Ethan released a breath he seemed to have been holding for days. Titan relaxed immediately. All right, Maria said softly. Now tell us what's going on. Ethan looked toward Sarah's grave, then toward Arthur, then toward Titan. Finally, he reached inside his jacket and removed a small brass key hanging from a cord around his neck. Mom gave me this. Arthur frowned. What does it open? Ethan stared at the key, the place where she hid everything. Maria exchanged a glance with Arthur. Everything? Ethan nodded. The papers, the money records, the proof. Arthur felt a chill. Proof of what? Ethan looked directly at him. Proof that Uncle David stole from my dad. Snow continued falling around them. The cemetery suddenly felt much quieter, much smaller, because if Ethan was telling the truth, then Sarah hadn't merely left a warning letter. She had hidden evidence. Evidence powerful enough to frighten David Mitchell. Evidence worth searching for. And judging by the desperation Arthur had seen in the man's eyes, David wasn't going to stop until he found it first. Arthur Bennett, Officer Maria Lopez, Ethan, and Titan sat inside the cemetery office while snow continued falling outside. The small building felt warmer than it had in years. Yet tension filled every corner. Ethan kept the brass key clenched tightly in his hand as though letting go might somehow put him in danger. Titan lay beside his chair, refusing to move more than a few feet away from the boy. Maria placed a cup of hot chocolate in front of Ethan. Start from the beginning. Ethan stared into the steam rising from the cup. Mom found out Uncle David was stealing money. From your father? Maria asked. Ethan nodded. After Dad died, slowly, the story emerged. Ethan's father, Michael Mitchell, had owned a successful construction company before his death, in a highway accident 6 years earlier. Most of the business assets were placed into a trust for Ethan until he became an adult. Sarah managed the trust for years without problems. Then she became ill. During her cancer treatments, she discovered financial records that didn't make sense. Large withdrawals, missing accounts, forged signatures. The more she investigated, the more evidence she found pointing toward her brother. She confronted him? Arthur asked. Ethan nodded. That's when everything got worse. According to Ethan, David insisted the money belonged to him. Arguments became frequent. Sarah eventually hired an attorney named James Holloway to help investigate. The same lawyer from the letter, Arthur said. Ethan nodded again. Maria immediately reached for her phone. Less than an hour later, James Holloway arrived at the cemetery. The attorney was in his early 60s, with gray hair and tired eyes. The moment he saw Ethan, relief flooded across his face. Thank God, Ethan stood up. For the first time since Arthur met him, the boy willingly hugged an adult. Mom said I could trust you. James looked close to tears. Your mother was right. Once everyone settled, James confirmed much of Ethan's story. Sarah had uncovered evidence suggesting David had embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from the trust over several years. She planned to present everything in court after completing treatment. Then her health deteriorated rapidly. Before she died, she hid copies of every document. James explained. She was afraid David would destroy the evidence. Maria leaned forward. Do you know where? James shook his head. Only Sarah and Ethan knew. All eyes turned toward the boy. Ethan looked down at the brass key. Mom showed me once. Arthur smiled gently. Then maybe it's time. Ethan hesitated. Then he nodded. 20 minutes later, the group entered the older section of the cemetery. Snow covered the ground. Wind moved softly through rows of weathered headstones. Ethan led the way with Titan walking beside him. Eventually, they stopped near a stone mausoleum built more than a century earlier. Arthur had passed the structure thousands of times without paying special attention to it. "Here," Ethan said. James frowned. "The mausoleum?" Ethan walked to the rear wall. Hidden behind overgrown ivy sat a small metal panel. The brass key fit perfectly. A soft click echoed through the winter air. The panel opened. Behind it rested a small safe. Maria looked genuinely impressed. "Your mother was smart." Ethan managed a faint smile. She said nobody looks for secrets in cemeteries. Inside the safe were dozens of documents, bank statements, trust records, property transfers, emails, contracts. James began reviewing them immediately. His expression darkened with every page. "This is everything." Maria looked over his shoulder. "Enough to charge him?" James nodded. "More than enough." Then he froze. "Wait." Arthur noticed a separate envelope tucked beneath the records. Across the front, Sarah had written only 3 words. "For whoever helps." James carefully opened it. Inside was a letter. This one wasn't addressed to Ethan. It was addressed to the person who eventually found him. Arthur listened quietly as James read aloud. "If you're reading this, then Ethan found someone he trusts. Thank you. More than anything else, I worried about my son being alone. I know he can be stubborn. He gets that from me. But he's also brave. If he's standing beside you, then it means you earned something precious." His trust. Arthur felt his throat tighten. Sarah continued, "I don't know who you are. Maybe a police officer. Maybe a lawyer. Maybe a complete stranger. Whoever you are, please remind Ethan that he still belongs somewhere. Remind him that losing family doesn't mean losing home." Nobody spoke for several moments. Even Maria looked emotional. Then Ethan quietly turned toward Arthur. "You stayed." The old caretaker smiled. "Somebody had to." Ethan shook his head. "Most people don't." Before Arthur could respond, headlights appeared near the cemetery entrance. Everyone turned. A familiar black pickup truck rolled through the gates. David Mitchell. He had returned, but this time he wasn't alone. And judging by the look on Maria's face, the confrontation they had been expecting had finally arrived. The black pickup stopped beside the mausoleum. 2 additional vehicles followed behind it. For a brief moment, Arthur Bennett feared David Mitchell had brought friends to intimidate them. Then the doors opened. Uniformed deputies stepped out. David's face was pale, defeated, angry. Behind him walked 2 detectives carrying folders filled with documents. Maria Lopez smiled slightly. "Looks like James made a few phone calls." James Holloway nodded. "The district attorney moved faster than I expected." One of the detectives approached the group. "David Mitchell?" David didn't answer. "You're being placed under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, forgery, and several related financial crimes." The man looked toward Ethan. For the first time, David seemed to realize he had truly lost. "This isn't over," he muttered. Ethan didn't flinch. Months earlier, he might have. Now he simply stood beside Titan. The Doberman remained seated calmly at his side, watching, guarding. David was escorted to a patrol vehicle while snow drifted quietly through the cemetery. Nobody celebrated. There was too much relief for celebration. Too much exhaustion. After everything that had happened, they simply wanted it to be finished. As the police vehicles disappeared through the cemetery gates, Ethan released a breath he seemed to have been holding for weeks. Arthur placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You okay?" Ethan thought about it. "I don't know." The answer was honest. Arthur appreciated that. Over the following weeks, life began changing rapidly. The stolen trust funds were recovered. Court proceedings moved forward. Local authorities arranged temporary housing for Ethan, while legal guardianship questions were resolved. James Holloway remained closely involved throughout the process. Yet one problem remained. Ethan had no immediate family willing or able to take him in. The reality weighed heavily on everyone. One December afternoon, social worker Karen Brooks sat inside Arthur's office reviewing paperwork. "There are several foster families available," she explained gently. Ethan sat silently beside Titan. Arthur noticed the boy's expression immediately. Fear. The same fear he carried when David appeared at the cemetery. "Do I have to leave?" Ethan asked quietly. Karen hesitated. Eventually, Arthur looked down. Titan rested his head against Ethan's leg. The dog seemed to sense exactly what was happening. Then something unexpected occurred. Karen glanced between Arthur and Ethan. "Actually," she said slowly, "there may be another option." Arthur frowned. "What kind of option?" Karen smiled. "One that already exists." Several weeks later, After home studies, interviews, inspections, and enough paperwork to fill a small library, the answer finally arrived. On Christmas Eve, Arthur Bennett stood in front of a judge alongside Ethan. Titan sat between them, wearing a red collar. Someone from town had bought for the occasion. The courtroom was small, quiet, filled with people who had become part of Ethan's journey. Maria attended, James attended, several townspeople attended. Even some cemetery visitors came. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at the documents. Then he smiled. Well, Ethan held his breath. Arthur wasn't doing much better. It appears everything is in order. The old caretaker felt his eyes sting. Your Honor, the judge raised a hand. Mr. Bennett. A smile spread across his face. Congratulations. Ethan stared for a second before understanding. Really? Really? The boy immediately turned toward Arthur. Neither seemed entirely sure what to do. Then Arthur opened his arms. Ethan practically launched himself across the room. Laughter and applause filled the courtroom. Titan barked once, loudly, as if offering his own approval. That Christmas became the first real Christmas Ethan had celebrated in years. The cemetery cottage felt different now. Warmer, brighter. A second stocking hung beside Arthur's fireplace. A third hung lower for Titan. Neighbors delivered food. Church groups dropped off gifts. People who had followed the story wanted Ethan to know he wasn't alone anymore. More importantly, Ethan slowly began believing it himself. Winter passed. Then spring arrived. School resumed. Life settled into something resembling normal. Yet one tradition never changed. Every Sunday morning, Arthur, Ethan, and Titan visited Sarah Mitchell's grave together. They brought fresh flowers. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat quietly. Either way, they always came. One warm afternoon nearly a year later, Ethan sat beside the grave, while Titan rested nearby. Arthur watched from a distance. The boy no longer looked frightened. He no longer looked like a child hiding from the world. He looked like a boy who finally knew where he belonged. After a few minutes, Ethan stood and walked toward him. You know what Mom was wrong about? Arthur smiled. What's that? Ethan glanced toward Titan. She said I shouldn't trust anybody. Arthur laughed softly. Your mother had good reasons. Ethan nodded. Yeah. Then he smiled. But she never met you. Arthur felt his throat tighten. Before he could respond, Titan pushed his head between them, demanding attention. Both laughed immediately. The Doberman accepted the ear scratches with obvious satisfaction. Together they walked home through the cemetery gates. Not as a caretaker, a stray child, and a dog, but as a family, the kind that isn't always connected by blood. Sometimes it's connected by loyalty, by trust, by showing up when someone needs you most. And sometimes it begins with a lonely boy sleeping beside his mother's grave and a Doberman who refuses to leave him alone. Sometimes the people who save us are not the people we expect. They do not arrive with grand speeches or dramatic promises. They simply stay when everyone else leaves. They sit beside us in our darkest moments and quietly remind us that we are not alone. Ethan Mitchell believed he had lost everything. He lost his mother. He lost his home. He lost the ability to trust the adults around him. Fear convinced him that the safest place in the world was a cemetery beside his mother's grave. It was the only place where he felt close to someone who loved him. Many children facing grief build walls around their hearts. Ethan did the same. He pushed people away because losing someone hurts less when nobody gets close enough to leave. Yet even the strongest walls cannot completely block kindness. Arthur Bennett never set out to become a hero. He was simply an old cemetery caretaker doing his job. He saw a frightened child sleeping in the cold and refused to ignore him. Day after day, night after night, he kept showing up. He offered help without demanding trust. He offered patience instead of pressure. And little by little, he became the safe place Ethan desperately needed. Titan understood something that many people forget. Sometimes comfort comes before words. The Doberman never asked Ethan to explain his fears. He never asked questions. He simply stayed beside him. On cold nights, he shared warmth. On lonely nights, he shared companionship. When the world felt dangerous, he stood between the boy and whatever frightened him. In many ways, Titan became the bridge that allowed Ethan to trust again. Sarah Mitchell's greatest fear was not death. It was leaving her son alone. Like every loving parent, she worried about what would happen after she was gone. Yet, even in her final days, she did everything possible to protect him. She hid the truth. She left instructions. She left evidence. Most importantly, she left behind her love, and love has a way of surviving longer than we expect. The stolen money was recovered, justice was served, the people responsible faced the consequences of their actions, but those victories were not the true ending of the story. The real ending happened when Ethan stopped seeing himself as a child with nowhere to go. The real ending happened when he found a home. Family is often described as the people we are born to. Sometimes that is true, but life teaches a different lesson as well. Family can also be the people who choose to stay. The people who protect you when they have no obligation to do so. The people who love you because of who you are rather than because of blood. Arthur, Ethan, and Titan became that kind of family. A family built not through birth, but through trust, through loyalty, through second chances. Perhaps that is why stories like this stay with us. They remind us that grief does not have to be faced alone. They remind us that healing is possible even after tremendous loss. Most importantly, they remind us that one act of kindness can completely change the direction of another person's life. A blanket offered to a lonely child, a conversation, a helping hand, a faithful dog lying beside someone who needs a friend. Small actions often create the biggest miracles. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone unexpectedly became family to you? Have you ever known a dog whose loyalty helped change someone's life? We'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories about loyal dogs, family, faith, hope, second chances, and the extraordinary people who choose kindness when it matters most. May God bless you and your loved ones. Comfort those carrying grief. Protect children who feel alone. Strengthen those opening their hearts to others. And remind all of us that home is not always a place. Sometimes, home is a person who refuses to give up on you. And may you never forget that sometimes the path to a new family begins with a faithful Doberman sitting quietly beside a lonely boy beneath the stars.